The following program, Know the Cause, is paid for by Mediatrition Incorporated.
What a lineup we have for you today. Welcome aboard and thank you so much for joining us, folks. Dr. Julia Schulenburg is going to be here toward the end of the show. She's a naturopathic doctor talking about epigenetics, not so much genetics, epigenetics. Lee Cowden before that talking about high blood pressure, hypertension. He's a cardiologist friend of mine. He'll help us with that. Dr. John Trowbridge in the middle of the show. Have you ever seen someone who was a total teetotaler and yet ended up getting pulled over by a policeman and they find that he or she is drunk? This is called auto brewery syndrome. We'll talk about that. And then finally, I'm going to open today's show with this question, and it needs to be answered. Why are we so sick in America? Do we have the best health care in the world? Watch.
For the past 45 years, I have dedicated my life and my whole career to finding the root cause of disease. And I now know with certainty that we must play a role in our own health care. I'm a self-care advocate, and you know what? Every time you change your diet for the better, exercise, or swallow a nutritional supplement, so are you. Now welcome to Know the Cause.
My wife and I were watching, do you get Turner Classics? I love that. We have Dish, Turner Classics. Old movies, 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Folks, the thing, there was a beach scene, and everybody on that beach is rail thin. 1935. It's absolutely amazing what happened to us, right? I'll try and answer that right now. I'm glad you're watching. Why are people so sick in 2022? Look at this. I've used this back a dozen years ago, this graphic. The number of children with developmental disorders, including autism, ADD, has increased by 17% between 97 and 08 in the US, according to a new study. That means that in 2008, 15% of all US children, or nearly 10 million children, had a developmental disorder according to the study. It's almost like we're hungry to hyperdiagnose anything. He's not growing fast enough. Well, he stutters. Well, he's reading the words mixed up. Why? Certainly diet couldn't play a role in this. I think diet does if you have one precursor. Stick with me. Death from cancer have skyrocketed. Down there at the left, 1930, and over to the right, the year 2000. I mean, this folks, is every disease is going up. Look at heart disease. Heart disease statistics. You can't read that. I made it kind of tiny, and thank you, American Heart, American Journal. .org. That's 1900, then it goes up to 10, 20, 30, 50, 60. Look at heart disease. Look at any disease. Where was it before this thing came along? The precursor, I think, to all diseases. Let's keep going. Iatrogenically means medically caused obesity epidemic. The authors also correctly highlighted the incontrovertible evidence that the obesity and metabolic syndrome epidemic we are facing is largely drug-caused, as highlighted by this. Given this, we must accept that we are essentially complicit in greatly increasing our own patient morbidity and mortality, and that this epidemic within an epidemic we caused is iatrogenic. That was The Psychiatrist, volume 37, number 1, 10 years ago. We're causing illness and death. That was the first time I really saw them say, whoops, couldn't be our pills, could it? Are doctors, hospitals, clinics iatrogenically inducing ill health? They don't mean to, folks. These are some of the finest people. I have a lot of friends who are doctors, nurses, and I'm telling you, they're stellar. Their training, I don't think, was. But they are stellar. They became doctors and nurses, medical people, lab techs, LPNs, LVNs. They became medical people to help people. They had a craving for this when they were younger. God bless them. They're doing wonderfully. But what if their education was flawed a tiny bit? Let's keep going. Here's my take. The elephant in the room the past 70 years is antibiotics. Soon after World War II, antibiotics were introduced. In agriculture, we all know this, they're used as growth promoters. These are neurotoxic fungal mycotoxins, and as such, when overused, can cause most any illness known to man, yet they are overlooked as a possible cause to most any illness. Think about it. 1940, beginning of World War II, we didn't have antibiotics. Today, folks, the damage I believe done by antibiotics is called seeding. I don't think the 7-year-old who takes antibiotics becomes obese or has more risk of cancer, but I think if that 7-year-old becomes 9 and 12 and 15 and 35 years old and continues on antibiotics, I'm pretty certain there's a link there in illness. Okay, antibiotics can be life-saving when used judiciously, but medical journals admit their overuse is common. However, they're linked with neurological symptoms, epileptic seizures, heart disease symptoms, obesity, and even cancer. Many of you know I do a lot of my research on a NIH, National Institute of Health, website called PubMed. If you got a grant, you got to publish it on PubMed. There's probably millions of papers on it. So let's talk about that. The National Institute of Health website, PubMed.gov, stores medical research articles. When you type into their search engine the words antibiotic-induced, 132,000 papers are listed. Antibiotic overuse can lead to significant human mortality and morbidity. Talk to your doctor if you're routinely taking antibiotics, and just take a minute here and let me land on this. I won't say a word. It comes from a book in 1979 called The Genus Penicillium, and take a read. We knew it 50 years ago. It's not going away. Be careful with antibiotics. I hope that helps. Joining us right now is Dr. John Trowbridge. I have said that name for 41 years. When we first met out in Humble, Texas.
Humble, Texas, that's
Can't
right.
say humble, I had to say humble. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. I think you're a genius. You mentored me through the years. He's written a book called The Yeast Syndrome. Many of us have seen it. It's been around 36 years. He's written another one that's free. It's yours, Sick and Tired. You can download it on his website. We'll give you that information. I want to talk to you about something called brewery syndrome, which I had no idea 25 years ago what it was. It's a real phenomenon, folks.
Absolutely.
Sometimes a policeman pulls over a person, they haven't had a drop to drink, and they're labeled because they have high blood alcohol levels. You had a lot to drink, you're not telling us the truth, and off to jail they go. Sometimes it's rare, I'm sure, but sometimes, Dr. Trowbridge, they haven't had a thing to drink.
Correct.
Wow, tell us about it.
In fact, often they don't, because they realize that, they didn't feel good when they drank alcohol, which can amplify the effects of autobrewery. We've got all these custom breweries now that do these craft beers and everything like that. It's a different kind of brewery because you're crafting it yourself with the bacteria and the yeast in your gut. There are some bacteria that will play the game as well, but the yeast are more common because, we're wet, warm, and wonderful. Yeast love growing inside us to recycle us. That's their job in life. And when they make a waste product called alcohol, you absorb it just as though you had drunk it. It affects your systems just the way regular alcohol does. Now, the interesting thing about that is, did you commit a crime? Well, no, but yes, because you were actually, let's say, operating a motor vehicle, your blood alcohol level was up. That's it, that's all they need. Talking a judge or a prosecutor out of that into a medical treatment system is sometimes hard because they got all the elements they need. Now the judicial system needs to take advantage of recognizing people rather than procedures.
Yeah. Can I ask, would a preemptive measure to induce this auto brewery? In other words, you're saying endogenously, we got a brewery going right here.
Inside you.
You're breathing out alcohol. There have been people fired from their jobs because they went in smelling like alcohol, and they're teetotalers. Would a preemptive move by that patient, the person with auto brewery syndrome, be a few rounds of antibiotics?
No. Antibiotics just make it more fun. There's actually been people who were hospitalized, given the antibiotics, given the sugars and starches and such, and then measured the blood alcohol levels to document that was what was going on. You don't need that really. Really, a good history. Actually, a good history answers most everything. Okay, but taking care of the autobrewery patients can be very complex because each one is individual. They're not just all the same.
Do they crave breads, pastas?
Some do.
No alcohol, but they crave other carbohydrates.
Some do.
It's fascinating. I can just imagine if I get pulled over, and is that alcohol in your breath? Yeah, sometimes people tell me that, but I don't drink. I stopped drinking 10 years ago.
I hope they call me and I'll tell them about you.
I'm going to have your phone number, 1-800-FIX-PAIN. Right?
That's it.
Call this doctor.
This guy is really an yes, closet alcoholic.
How did you get through all this medical training? You did your pre-graduate work where at Stanford, and then went on the university.
Western Reserve.
How did you do all this and then realize chelation is beneficial,
right?
And yeast, it permeates any human tissue?
Well, you know, when you start looking at what's not working, which is classical care, and you start saying, well, what would work? And you start kind of tripping along that thin line of going, oh, wow, I was not taught about this, but it works. It gets people better.
You're amazing. If you suffered, or a loved one suffered from ABS, autobrewery, is it fixable?
Oh, it's totally fixable. It takes time because, like I say, each patient is different. You know, people think of, I'm treating a disease. No, I'm treating a patient. And it's like a chair and a table has 4 legs. You've got to treat all 4, not just 3. And that's the same thing with the patient. You're not just treating yeast or autobrewery, you're treating the patient.
Nystatin, you know, which sops up yeast in the gut.
Nystatin helps, diflucan helps, the diet helps. There's other things as well, but, you know, it's a finesseful, elegant, wonderful way to get people better.
Have you seen that clinically?
Them to
Do you see patients like that?
Oh yes, yes.
It's amazing. Your mind is a dangerous thing. Okay, how do they get Sick and Tired free download?
Very simple. Go to healthchoicesnow.com. That's our website, because if you don't know you have health choices now, you don't have any.
Great name.
And download it.
Yeah, and his phone number, by the way, folks, is 1-800-FIX-PAIN. How he got that? I haven't a clue. It must have been 40, 50 years ago when we met.
Bribery.
Bribery gets you everywhere. Good to see you, Dr. Trowbridge.
Thank you
for coming in. Oh, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you folks a dear friend of my wife and mine for about 32 years, Lee Cowden. Lee is a cardiologist, a heart specialist, and also he's the scientific, on the scientific committee of ACIM, the Academy of Complementary and Integrative Medicine. He's written books and articles, and he's just everything to us. Dr. Cowden, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Great to be on with you.
Borderline hypertension versus real hypertension. Why all of a sudden, I know stress the past few years, why all of a sudden do Americans have so many hypertension, high blood pressure problems?
Well, stress increases blood pressure, and most doctors are trained to say if your blood pressure is over 140 systolic or above 90 diastolic, you have to go on a pharmaceutical medication. And it's just not so. Dr. Kaufman, no relationship to you, wrote a book, Malignant Medical Myths. And he has a chapter in that book about the real science behind hypertension. And he shows that clearly most people that are being treated for hypertension shouldn't be treated for hypertension. So,
you helped a friend of ours with something called Nutrimetics, drops in water, whatever it was. She's doing wonderfully. What is that?
Yeah, Nutrimetics has a product that they call Glucometics that is a combination of stevia, which is an herbal sweetener, and cemento, which is a special type of Peruvian cat's claw. And this particular combination lowers blood pressure, lowers cholesterol levels, lowers hypertension, diabetes, improves quite a few different things that are related to syndrome X. And so, that was actually published now as a case series in Clinical Sciences and Clinical Phytoscience, it is, this year, 2022. And it was 6 cases showing that they could reduce their pharmaceutical medication for diabetes that could reduce their medication for hypertension, and other improvements just as a result of taking an herbal combination. Now, you'd say, well, why are we taking a potentially toxic drug when you could do a natural herbal instead?
And then, of course, folks, Dr. Cowden, again, we've been friends for many years. He talks about the importance of moving, exercise. He talks about the importance of diet. But as far as hypertension, just know many of us feel it's something that's being overdiagnosed. Tell your doctor you'd like to try alternatives. Nutrimetics is the name of that company. Look them up online. Dr. Cowden, we sure appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Good to be on with you, Doug.
Did you ever wonder why we here at Know the Cause love green apples and use that as our logo? It's the apple with the highest content of malic acid, a natural ingredient discovered way back in 1785. It makes green apples sour. When used as a dietary supplement, malic acid can re-energize muscle cells and reduce muscle aches. So if you have fibromyalgia, eating green apples or taking malic acid supplements can go a long way.
Well, you see peripherally there my good friend Dr. Julia Schulenburg. She's a naturopathic doctor. She has a bachelor's of science in nursing, was a nurse for many years, ICU, and then became an MD. I'm sorry, I almost said MD. I'm sorry. Naturopaths, I encourage on my live shows that we tape. You know this, guys. I encourage people, if you've got a medical doctor and you've got a couple extra bucks, always have a naturopathic doctor too. So there, I said it. I want to talk to you a little bit about our genes, our genetic makeup, because I love the way you have taught the people we've sent to you about their genetic makeup and genetics versus something called epigenetics. Teach us.
Well, just to start, I want to say that I'm not a genetic expert, okay? But I do know that epigenetics plays a large role in our genes and how they express themselves. Genetics, when someone comes in with a genetic panel or a genetic test, it tests for less than 30,000 of our genes, but we have more than 100,000 genes in our makeup. So that brought me to the conclusion, rather than me diving headfirst and studying the genetic SNPs and the genetic tests and the panels, I need to study epigenetics. Epigenetics plays a big role because it's everything that has to do with diet, our lifestyle, the foods that we eat, the nutrients that we take in, toxins, chemicals, insecticides, pesticides, toxic heavy metals, our external environment, our internal environment, high frequency synthetic man-made electromagnetic frequencies.
Epigenetics, many factors that control our genetic predisposition to illness and many other things. Epigenetics focus on internal and external environmental factors that affect how our genes express themselves. In other words, Dr. Julia, you are what you eat. You know, I watch my mom and dad have health problems in their later years, and most of us think, that's the hand I'm dealt. That sperm and egg became me, and so I'm going to have those same health problems. But epigenetics says you're not the hand you were dealt. Your dad didn't exercise. You know,
No.
he enjoyed a different lifestyle and diet than mine.
Right. Inherited disease, that it does play a role, but it doesn't mean that we're going to have those same diseases. Okay, because epigenetics would say, yes, you may have a predisposition to some of those diseases, but epigenetics also says, well, if you change your lifestyle, if you change your food that you eat, if you change the thoughts that you think, if you change the belief systems that you believe, then that will play a role in counteracting what hand you think that you were dealt with.
Dr. Susan Love wrote the breast book about breast cancer and so forth. And in that book, I'll quote her, only about 5 to 10% of breast cancer cases are linked to mom or grandma. It's fascinating, folks, because you tend to believe, if you sit down with a lot of doctors, traditional doctors, oh, mom had breast cancer, we want to do a mammogram, every 6 months on you, when in reality, I'm a 95% guy. I'm not a 5% guy. Dad lost a leg to cancer, he had prostate problems, he had a pacemaker, he had all sorts of health problems. But I looked at his lifestyle before he died, and he was sedentary, he enjoyed beer, things that I'm not. And I never knew back when I was younger that my jogging, my races I ran and so forth, my diet would have such an impact on Dad's DNA. Have you had a genetic test? Do you go in and get a blood test or a swab and get your genes tested?
I've had many opportunities to, but I chose not to because it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that I'm putting in the right foods in my body. I'm detoxifying my body, my cells of toxic chemicals, insecticides, pesticides, heavy metals, and I have the right belief systems, because that is epigenetics. That is what's changing the expression of any genes that I have. And that's what's, to me, is most important.
See, I'm a conspiracy theorist guy. I worry that if I give some samples, it's going somewhere other than that laboratory. I'm a little bit worried about lending my DNA to anybody. So what you're saying, Dr. Julia, by the way, you can see what she's doing, and it's exciting. Holistic Healing, Holistic, Holistic Healing, JS, JuliaSchulenburg.com. What I'm hearing is I can change the hand I was dealt by my lifestyle, my diet, and the way my brain thinks.
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely.
Good information.
Yes. I know that there's been a lot of scientific research about, say, generational parental experiences going into our cells and cellular memory. That's all correct, but we can change all that as well.
And it's called on or upon in medicine.
That is called epigenetics.
Yeah.
And I don't discount cell memory, and I don't discount inherited diseases. I'm not completely discounting genetic testing, but I think there's not too much weight put into that, not enough weight put on epigenetics.
Science. Someday I want you to define science. Which science? The science of 50 years ago? The science of today? Or the science of 50 years from now? Good to be with you. Thank you for that brain. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So how did we do today? Folks, thank you so much. It's been 23 years. I had dark hair and probably a mustache when I started all of this. Thank you for sticking with me through the past almost quarter of a century here on television. We now have a radio show that airs every Saturday. I have a new podcast on my website, knowthecause.com. Thank you, Dr. Julia Schulenburg. Thank you, Dr. John Trowbridge. Thank you, Dr. Lee Cowden. Thank you for hearing me out in the opening of today's show. Why are we so sick? Couldn't be fungus, because doctors learned that much about bacteria, that much about viruses, and this much about fungus. Figure that out, folks. When they begin teaching clinical mycology in medical school, I think we all win. God bless. Bye-bye.
The preceding program, Know the Cause, was paid for by Mediatrition Incorporated.